So let's take a look at the data types in FHIR. Now again, we can go through the documentation on the FHIR website and just try to understand what all of these are. To learn more about FHIR, we just released an entire course on FHIR and it's completely free. You can just go to our website and then I'll also put a link down below. You can enroll in this course for free today. All right, so let's get into FHIR data types. Now again, the FHIR page on data types has a lot of information. This might be overwhelming if you're just like getting started. So I like to keep things simple. Let's just look at a patient resource and see what fields we can have in a patient resource. So let's start with the simpler fields, right? So let's take a look at things like, for example, active, right? Like, so it's either true or false. Then you have a birth date. That can either be a date or, it can also be a year. So again, like, let's take a look at the documentation here under primitive types. So boolean, right? It's true or false. So that's exactly what we see here. Birth date is a date. So we again come back to date and then it tells you, okay, it can be a date, it can be a partial date, it can just be a year and a month, it can be, year, month, year, month, and it can have a day, but it can't have the time zone. Right. So dates shall be valid dates, and this is a regex expression that they've given us on what a valid date actually means. Now, they also tell you how you can represent this in XML and how you can represent in JSON. So again, in JSON, for example, a Boolean field will just be a JSON Boolean, true or false. And in this case, a date would be a string. So it says a JSON string, a union of this, and this, and that is how it's represented in XML. Okay, so now let's come back. And again, we have another field here, which is multiple birth integer. This basically represents if there were multiple children born at the same, in the same birth. So like, are they twins? Now this is an integer, so it can be like 1 or 2 or more. So again, let's take a look at integer. So here we have integer, assigned integer in the range of minus this thing to plus this particular thing. So you can't represent anything like below that. So again, you can represent this as a JSON number with no decimal points. And again, in XML, they have their own representation. So a simple or like primitive data types are anything that you can just represent directly. Like you see there is a key and there is a value almost immediately after the key. That is a simple data type. Now let's take a look at the more complex ones. So again, we have a few more general purpose complex types here. So again, they've separated the complex types into the general purpose, the metadata types, and the special purpose. There is not really much of a difference between all of this except the way in which they are used. So the general purpose data types will keep showing up everywhere in all of the different resources, and you will see them all over the place. And they're also like, all of them are defined in this page. Like if you go to the data types page, you will see all of them here. Now, the metadata types are just things that are used for adding some extra additional information to the resource. They don't really represent real world information. They're just there to help the resource get a little bit more context when somebody is viewing it. Again, we'll take a look at that. But the special purpose data types are again very resource specific, or they are they are a little different, and sometimes all of the special purpose data types may not be defined on this data types page. So they might be defined with a resource, they might be defined somewhere else as well. So let's take a look at some general purpose complex types. So first up, we have the identifier. So again, we've already seen this, but basically this represents any sort of real world identifier that you can give to a patient. So this can be a hospital number, it can be a driving license, it can be a passport, it can be their social security number. So anything that is there in the real world, and you can put a name to that, you can have an identifier. Right, and again, like, let's take a look at what this looks like. So if we have the identifier here, let's click on that. So they tell you an identifier intended for computation. So it's basically a numeric or alphanumeric string that is associated with a single object or entry within a given system. So again, this needs a system, right? So again, we have a system defined with this particular URL. Now, again, a quick note on URIs and URLs, right? So in FHIR, a lot of times we will see just a random URL, right? And many times you may be tempted to click on that and like open that. But again, this need not be a valid website. Again, in this case, it says page not found. There is an actual domain, but this need not even be a valid domain. So the only reason for using URLs and URIs in this use case is to identify them uniquely, right? So this is again it's sort of like a namespace that we are giving. So for example, a passport that is issued by a country might have a particular system URL. And the only place where you can check what that system is might be in the FHIR implementation guide, or might be in the FHIR doc somewhere. So this necessarily does not need to be a valid resolving HTTP URL. It can be anything. So just a quick note so that you don't get confused when you see these URIs all over FHIR resources. So the system is, again, it's just there to identify something. By convention, it is a URL. And usually the person who owns the domain will have control over what that system means. Okay. Now, again, the value is quite simple. It's just like what value we are assigning to that identifier. And again, we can see that this is an array, and that is because the cardinality of this inpatient is actually 0 to multiple, right? So under an identifier, everything else is just 0 to 1. So you can only have one instances of each of this. And this in turn, again, we can see that these are all primitive types again. So a system is a URI. So we can see that a URI is any uniform resource identifier. And in fact, if you actually take a look at what URI constitute uniform resource identifier, yeah, here we go. So we see that it has multiple parts, and there is this whole thing. There's a scheme to it. So again, you have the scheme. In this case, it's http:// you have something, and then you can have at something. So this is the actual structure of a URI. In this case, we are just using it with HTTP, but it can also not be HTTP. For example, this can be SFTP. It can be any protocol. Any valid URI works here. All right, so let's take a look at HumanName up next. So again, we will go back to the general purpose data types, and we see HumanName. And it's pretty simple to understand once you know what to look for. And we see that given is 0 to multiple, and that's why this is an array again. And you can have multiple given names. So a person might have one last name or like one family name, but they might have a middle name. They might have a first name. They can have like multiple middle names. So it's quite common throughout the world to like have multiple names. So that's why FHIR has come out with like multiple given as an array. But again, all of the complex data types, all you need to know about in the general purpose category is that these are sort of bundles of information that you can put alongside another field, right? So here we have name, which is in the FHIR patient resource, and name itself is 0 to multiple. So we see an array here, but once you are inside a particular name, then you have given as 0 to multiple, and then you have these different fields, right? So again, same goes for address and telecom. So again, let's quickly just take a look at address. So it tells you an address expressed using postal conventions as opposed to GPS. This data type may be used to convey address for use in delivering mail, blah, 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 or anything that you can use an address for, okay? And they tell you the specification that you're supposed to use. Specifically, like if you look at country, they tell you that you're supposed to use the ISO 3166 code, right? And if you take a look at that, and look at the list of countries, ISO will obviously ask you to pay some money to even download these codes. But if you just go to Wikipedia, I think they have a list of all the country codes according to this ISO spec. So you can just put the first 2 letters in address, and that is a valid address. Yeah. All right. So again, telecom, very commonly used. It's used for multiple systems. So you can have phone, but you can also have email. You can have different things. And you see that how system here is also, it's just an identifier for what information we are talking about. It does not need to be a valid URL all the time. And in this case, let's actually come back to telecom. So again, this is a contact point data type. So let's click on contact type, and we see that the system here is in fact not even a URI, it's a code, and it can only be one of these, right? So again, if you take a look at code, they tell you indicates that a value is taken from a set of controlled strings defined elsewhere. Okay, so typically a code is restricted to a string which has at least one character and no leading trails. So again, there is a regex here, but then it's usually bound to a list of things that they define. So in this case, it needs to be one of these, right? So the validation happens using that. And again, the value is quite straightforward. It's just a string, so it's just anything that you can put in there. Now, again, let's come back to our example. Let's take a look at some metadata data types. Again, this is pretty boring, but again, like it's pretty necessary to understand what these mean. So here we have a narrative. And again, a narrative is always just a human readable summary of our resource, right? It's useful because we can see what exactly we represent. It's twin 2 of 2. We see that, they're born on this particular date. And you usually see this as a div. And the reason is because a lot of the times, if someone does not know how to interpret this FHIR resource, and that is, for clinical safety reasons, you just want to see what this data is. You can just render this div on the browser and they can still see like a table or something. So here again, I can show you an example of this in action. So if you go to patients, for example, when you go to the examples, you can just click on one patient and then by default, let's just click on this general person example. By default, you see the whole thing rendered as a div, right? Like it's not that much information that's actually coming out here. But this is actually using the narrative format and just showing you what it is. And if you take a look at the JSON, then you get like a lot more structured information here. But even if someone does not know how to interpret that FHIR resource, you always have a backup of just showing them the div and like actually rendering it in the browser. So that is what the narrative is for, and again, like that is represented under the metadata types. There is a lot more here, but we won't get into all of that. Now let's take a look at some of the special purpose data types. So again, the only difference here is how rarely this is like used. Now reference is a very important data type that I think all of you need to know about. And again, let's look at attachment first. So attachment, again, if we take a look at the special purpose, let's take a look at attachment. And again, it's one of those complex types, but basically what they say is, okay, you have another file that you want to put in, then you use an attachment, and then this attachment can then reference to a URL where you can actually find the data, or you can you can also put the size, the title of what you are attaching, and so on. You can also just inline the data and convert that to base 64 and put that in an attachment directly. So that is a valid way to represent things in FHIR as well. Now again, let's take a look at the reference. Now a reference is a very special kind of a resource type which defines a reference to another resource. So in this case, we see there is managing organization for a patient, and we see that there is a reference to organization /medblocks general. Now, on the server or wherever we are having this resource, there is another resource of type organization which has got the ID of medblocks general, right? Now, a reference type is you'll come across this a lot more in the future modules, but it helps link resources to one another. So you might have one resource pointing to another, and this is usually how you display a reference. And again, the display here can be just what is the organization exactly, what do you want to show if in case we can't go and fetch this actual resource. Yeah, I mean, these are the basic types. So we took a look at primitive types, general types, some metadata types, and some special purpose types. Again, I urge you to just take a look at the FHIR data types, the site, and then I'll also put a link down below. Just explore all of these data types a little bit more in depth, get a hang around it. It might take a few days before you're like actually familiar with all of these data types, but it goes a long way when you just look at a resource and you can identify what that should look like, right? Like by just looking at the data type. So yep, just go do that, study the data types a little bit more in depth.